Good morning, everybody. Welcome into another episode here of Home Field Advantage. If you're listening on audio after the fact, happy to have you in there as well. It is October 9th, I believe, 2022. If you're listening now, thanks again for joining us on YouTube Live and on audio afterward, wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, or anywhere else. My name is Will Highland. Happy to bring you into the program here. It is our Bruins preview show of the year. In the past, we had done a preview show for the Red Sox and then again in August for the Patriots. And so because of that, here in October, the NHL season facing off for the Bruins this coming Wednesday, I wanted to do a Bruins preview show just real quick. On another note, we are, if you're watching live, going to be doing a Patriots-Lions game chat over on our Colorcast channel at Sportland USA. So you can check us out over there. But for now, we're going to dive right into the Bruins season preview here. Really looking forward to getting it started. See if I've got anybody joining. Got a couple people, I think. Maybe. We'll see. But anyway, just happy to have you on here. And let's start out without further ado with this Bruins preview. The best place to begin, in my opinion, is the offseason. What happened to the roster during the offseason? Who did we lose? Who did we gain? And what are the expectations heading into the season? All right. So the season ended in Game 7 on May 14th in a loss to the Carolina Hurricanes. Hard-fought game, hard-fought series, win either way. But at the end of the day, the Bruins forward group wasn't enough to overcome some of the more talented, fast, and high-flying teams in the Eastern Conference, and specifically the Atlantic Division. Fast forward a few weeks after that, Coach Bruce Cassidy was fired by GM Don Sweeney and team president Cam Neely in a move that shocked the fan base, and many people, myself included, were not pleased with that result. Not just that they lost in Game 7 to the Hurricanes. I believe the Hurricanes were a better team, but also because they lost their coach in a firing that a lot of people believe was unjust. In NHL history, there had only been two other coaches who had had a better winning percentage in a 6-year span than Bruce Cassidy had, and those other two coaches are in the NHL Hall of Fame. So, long way of saying the Bruce Cassidy firing at the beginning of the offseason was not well received by fans. Fast forward a few more weeks, we get the news that Jim Montgomery will be the new head coach of the Bruins. Jim Montgomery has ties to New England, played hockey at the University of Maine, has also coached at the collegiate level and at the pro level, most recently with the Dallas Stars. And so Montgomery bringing in to the fold is somebody who more of a player's coach, more of a offensively minded coach in some ways than Bruce Cassidy was. And so Bruins fans, I think after they warmed up to it, did like the Jim Montgomery hire. Some of the other things that occurred in the offseason was the Bruins didn't go out and make a big splash in free agency. They didn't go out and go after Johnny Gaudreau. They didn't go after Nazem Kadri. They didn't go after any of the other big ticket free agents in the NHL universe. What they did do, however, was make a trade that I believe ultimately will make their top 6 and their top 9 way stronger than it was in the past. They dealt Eric Haula to New Jersey for Pavel Zacha. I think Pavel Zacha has a little bit of a higher ceiling than Eric Haula did. They also kept Jake DeBrusk. They didn't deal Jake DeBrusk, so they keep that element of their top 6 or their top 9 together. And so with those two additions, in a way, like there were a lot of people that thought Jake DeBrusk would get traded. The fact that he didn't, we can almost call that a re-addition to the lineup. But the Zaka addition and the DeBrusque retention were two moves early in the offseason that I think the Bruins benefited from. They did lose Curtis Lazar to free agency, and they did, of course, as I said, lose Eric Halla. Both of those players were key forwards in their team last year. But ultimately, I think that they've improved their roster simply by exchanging Zaka and Halla. Now, the big elephant in the room with the Bruins offseason was the fact that Patrice Bergeron was an unrestricted free agent, technically, and that um, and that oh my God, his name is escaping me. David Krejci, of course. How can I forget? And that David Krejci was rumored to have come back, but wasn't. It wasn't until early August that those two were signed on the team, and just the addition of Krejci on top of Zaka makes this Bruins forward group much better than what we've seen. I'm not a massive expert on all these NHL sabermetrics or analytic numbers or whatever we want to call it, like Corsi and all that stuff. But what I do know is just from the eyeball test, David Krejci is a legit top 6 NHL forward if he plays the way he's played in his career. And also, even though he was playing against lesser competition last year, um, he's still only like 2 years or a year and a half removed from playing in the NHL. So I'm not too worried about David Krejci. I think that's a great addition. Um, there is some uncertainty about what's going to continue with the forward group as it pertains to Craig Smith and if he'll get traded. Because the Bruins still have a lot of money in the books tied up among Coyle, among Smith, and of course there's the impending situation with David Pastrnak. So there are some portions of this Bruins roster that I think we're still yet to see, even as training camp and the preseason concludes. But how about I just go right through the roster here, because I think the way it's constructed, and of course we have to take into account that Brad Marchand is hurt, but the way this forward group looks, I like it even without Marchand for the first couple months. I still like it way better than last season. Like on Friday, they had Foligno, Bergeron, and DeBrusque in the top line. Now you look at that for a second, and you're like, that's not a great top line. But then you have to factor in that Taylor Hall might end up on that top line. He also is dealing with a little bit of an injury situation. But if Taylor Hall ends up on that top line with a Bergeron and a DeBrusque, I think that's a great line in the interim until we get Marchand back. And then you look at Krejci, Zaka, Pastrnak in the second line, and Krejci, Pastrnak, Zaka, that's an all-check line. And I think Krejci and Pastrnak are going to love playing together. We've seen in the preseason so far that they have some fireworks with one another in terms of moving the puck in the offensive zone and setting each other up for scoring chances and really good shot opportunities. So I like Zaka, Krejci, and Pastrnak together for now. It is a little bit of a piecemeal. Lineup at this point because of the Hall and the Marchand injury. But then even the third line, you've seen a guy like Greer excel and find his way into the team as a complement to Coyle and Smith. So I really like that third line. I think they've got some hard-nosed potential. Craig Smith, he's kind of like a greaser, you know what I mean? Like he's gonna, dust people up but also score goals, and he's just gonna, keep his head down, keep his stick down, and do all those hockey cliches. That's a guy, if they hold on to Smith and don't deal him because of the salary cap situation, he's somebody who I like in that role. And then Coyle, I think, is where he belongs as a third line center. And then Greer has really popped in the preseason, so we'll see what the longevity with him is. But he again is one of those Boston Bruin type hard nosed players who I think will um, be quickly beloved among fans. I'm not going to come out here and compare him to Milan Lucic, but I'm going to compare him to Milan Lucic. I think he has that kind of potential if he maximizes it. And then speaking of players like that, he might be what we want Trent Frederick to be, but I still like Trent Frederick in the lineup in some way, shape, or form. Probably on that fourth line along with Nosek and Jacob Lauko. Where things start to get interesting, though, is Studnicka is not in this picture, and neither is Chris Wagner. There's a chance that both of those guys make the team and continue to be healthy scratches. I don't know how their particular contract situations, but I know that Wagner had signed an extension a couple of years ago and spent basically all of last year in the AHL. But he is, again, much like these other guys in the bottom of the lineup, sort of a duster, a greaser, whatever you want to use. And if the Bruins want to play that identity and have sort of like a high flying first two lines and then sort of like the bottom two lines be your classic Bruins line that we might have seen, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years ago, that might be an interesting strategy to employ. But we'll see what happens with the Studnicka and Wagner situation and with the Hall and Marchand injury, because I think those two things sort of will shake up this lineup. There's not a big possibility that the practice lines that we saw this past week are what we're even going to see 2 weeks from now. That's what happens when you have injury situations, new players, and a new head coach. All right, heading over to the defense. We also have to keep in mind there's injuries over there too. So Grzelcyk and McAvoy both on IR. That leaves Hampus Lindholm, excuse me, and Brandon Carlo as your top two D men right now, and then you've got Riley and Jakob Zaboral in the second pair there. I like Mike Riley and I like Jakob Zaboral together. We'll see what happens. I don't know how much ice time those two have had together in real NHL games. If you factor in the fact that Riley's fairly new, Zaboral's fairly young, and Zaboral was injured last year. But I still like that power play opportunity that both of those guys get. If one of them was to join the power play, I don't know about Lindholm or Carlo as sort of the power play quarterback. Usually, you look at somebody who's a little more quick, fast, undersized, maybe like a Torrey Krug was in recent years, or like a Matt Grzelcyk is to be that. But we'll see. I like Riley in that role right now, but I'm not convinced that Mike Riley is going to stay on the team because of his contract situation, much like with Craig Smith. He had a great goal the other day, but I'm just not convinced that he's going to stay on the team. But for now, I like him in that role. Then you've got Derek Forbort and Connor Clifton as your third pair. I think that's perfect. That's what those guys are bringing. They're not going to give you a lot of offense. Cliffy Hockey and Forbes, they're going to just rattle people around, deliver some hits, be down deep, dig, play well behind the net, do the full rink play there. And so I like those two guys if they're going to be third pair D. I don't want them any higher if I'm a Bruins fan because you just start to sacrifice a lot of offense here. And of course, with Grzelcyk and McAvoy out, it makes sense you're going to sacrifice some offense. But ultimately, I still like the way their D is shaping up. Not a big expert on some of these other guys like Jack Ashawn or Strawman, but we'll see how they find their way and if they find their way into the lineup. One thing of note, just as we close out talking about the skaters, they did waive Oscar Steen. That was somebody who a lot of people thought might have an outside chance heading into training camp of making the roster. And then the other point is that Fabian Lysell, just keep an eye on him as we're talking about wingers with this team, because I think Lysell has the opportunity to push for a roster spot and push out a guy like Frederick, Greer, Wagner, Studnicka, and then Smith if he gets traded. Like, you have an opportunity there to plug in one of your top prospects. They also have some other prospects kicking around in the NHL that we might, sorry, in the AHL that we might get a chance at looking at. Sean's one of those guys, as is Johnny Beecher. So we'll just take a look at that as we head into the season. I keep your eyes peeled. This lineup's going to change probably a lot in the month of October and into November. I doubt even by Christmas we'll have a full 12-man forward group that we see night in and night out. It might take a while for that to happen. And I think the way that could work out for the Bruins is it does keep some opposing coaches guessing, right? It's kind of hard to plan for a lineup if you're not quite sure what the lines are going to look like. If there's so many guys that can move up and down, it's good for matchups and good for keeping the opposing defenses on their toes. But what it isn't good for is consistency and chemistry. And that's one thing where, great, you might have awesome chemistry with Krejci and Pasternak or with Coyle and Smith, but what you lose is, not having Marchand and Bergeron with each other for a while. So I think that's something that the Bruins are going to miss early on in the season, which I guess leads me to, the biggest threats facing the team this year is this injury situation, and it's the impending contract situation with Pasta. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent if he's not extended or re-signed prior to the year. And we saw what happened last year in Calgary with Johnny Gaudreau. And we've seen what's happened before with some of these situations where somebody goes unsigned. It's actually happening with the Red Sox right now in Xander Bogaerts, as their season just concluded. Is you went all season with sort of this contract situation hanging over the head of the team. And so hopefully that doesn't happen with the Bruins. They're able to figure out what they want to do, much like what happened with the Jake DeBrusk saga. I think DeBrusk played better last year after it was kind of kind of a foregone conclusion that he wasn't going to get traded. All right, so those two threats, the injuries to Grzelcyk, to McAvoy, to Marchand, and the situation with Pasta's contract are the most significant internal threats. Externally, I look at the way the Ottawa Senators and the Detroit Red Wings have both improved their team in recent months since last season ended. I think the Senators in particular, now we know what the Red Wings are with Larkin and with all those guys, but with the Senators, what they did is they brought in some veterans. They brought in Claude Giroux. All right, they brought in Cam Talbot, I believe, as their goalie, if I'm not mistaken. And then they brought in Alex DeBrincat, who's one of the younger, more exciting players in the league, who's going to play alongside Brady Tkachuk. And suddenly you're looking at a Senators team that's more well-rounded than it had been before, that's young, that's hungry, that's got some exciting players and some veterans. And if you're just a casual NHL fan, you're excited about that. But also, if you're an Atlantic Division fan of somebody like the Bruins or even the Lightning, God forbid, who might be sort of on the decline a little bit in some ways, they might not. I don't think you could ever count the Tampa Bay Lightning out, but I just think that you're now starting to see the Panthers and the Leafs take big moves to try and get over that hump, whereas the Lightning have sort of already gotten over that hump. And so just playing the law of averages, it might be more likely that a team like that starts to decline. But I digress. If you're an Ottawa Senator fan and you're looking at the Boston Bruins, you're probably looking at, okay, well, those guys, they're on the decline and we're on the incline. So that could be a hungry team. That could be a team that, at the very minimum, plays spoiler in the division and causes a team like the Bruins or the Red Wings or the the Islanders or another team that has gotten better to challenge for a wild card spot, that's where the Senators could start to make some noise and play spoiler in the wild card chase. Same thing with the Columbus Blue Jackets. You look over there, the Eastern Conference is extremely talented top to bottom. I think there's really only two teams I would say that in the division that I don't, or in the conference that I don't think have a chance, and that would be the Canadiens and the Sabres. I think basically any other team in the Eastern Conference could make the playoffs at this point. And, the Blue Jackets, with the addition of Gaudreau and having, you know, having Line there and Benner there, I really like them still as a team that could challenge for a wild card spot. So that's where, if I'm the Bruins, as a Bruins guy, Bruins follower, Bruins commentator, a little bit worried about the long term. What's the season going to look like if they get off to a slow start? Because there's going to be a lot more teams nipping at their heels in the wild card chase and in the division than there have been in recent years, and that's saying something, given that last year was one of the most competitive Eastern Conference playoff structures I had seen really since I started following the NHL as a kid. So, and definitely since they did their new structure, maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago. So that's what I got my eyes on externally for the Bruins. I think if you're a Bruins fan, your expectation is that they will compete for a championship. Um, I don't know if that's a realistic expectation. I think a realistic expectation would be they definitely make the playoffs and win at least the first round, if not get past the second round. I think that's a realistic expectation with this team, with the major caveat being if they can hang on until they get healthy. If this team is fully healthy and you're looking at a top six of Marchand, Bergeron, DeBrusk, let's just say DeBrusk, and then Hall, Krejci, Pasternak. All right, and then you've got Zaka, Coyle, Smith, or Lysell, or somebody else. I mean, that top six plus that third line. I mean, that's good enough to offensively compete. And then if you look at the defense, and you've got a full year of Hampus Lindholm and McAvoy, Carlo, if he can take maybe one more step up, you've got him playing along with Grzelcyk, and then you've got Forbort and Clifton. I still think that's a good defensive group. We'll see if they're able to, get somebody like Ashan or someone else involved. But I'm bullish on the Bruins if they can weather the storm. So that's why I think it's still a realistic expectation for them to win a round or two in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to make it to the Stanley Cup final. We'll talk a little bit about this when we do our NHL preview show in a few days with Diesel. But I'm not bullish on the Bruins, winning the Eastern Conference. I still think you look around the Eastern Conference and you look at the Hurricanes, the Rangers, the Penguins, even at this point, not to mention the Leafs and the Lightning and the Panthers in your own division. They're gonna make some noise, right? The only teams again that I look at and I'm not too high on, I think the Devils could make a run a little bit, maybe not. They could make a run at the wild card. I'm looking around. Maybe you get the Flyers in that same situation with a new coach and a couple new players here and there. But really, the only bottom feeders are going to be the Sabres and the Canadiens. And even the Sabres, you can look at that team and how young they are and say, well, they could even have an opportunity to play spoiler. So it's wide open. And so that's why I think the war of attrition and the battle for supremacy in this conference and in this division is going to be harder than it's ever been for the Bruins. So that's why I don't think it's a slam dunk they're going to be in the conference finals. I would like them to get there. I think they're good enough to get there. I think that's a realistic expectation. But are they going to be right there facing off against the teams out west, like Edmonton, Colorado, Calgary, some of these high-powered offensive teams? Probably not. But I still think you can look at this Bruins team and expect that because of the Krejci edition, because of the Zaka edition, and the exchange of Hala for Zaka, and the way that we didn't even talk about goaltending. Honestly, I can't believe I skipped over that. But you still got the Swayman and the Allmark situation, two reliable NHL starters. Who's to say that Swayman doesn't take another step up in year 3? So really, they're the best case scenario, and there are ways that this could happen for the Bruins, would be they stay healthy. Some of these new additions mesh well with what they've got, and they get those guys back, like the Grizzlies, the McAvoys, and the Marchands. You're looking at a team that's, in my opinion, as good as any 1 through 6 in the East, and a team that, if things go well, can certainly make noise. But I don't think they're a Stanley Cup favorite by any means, and I don't think fans should expect that. All right. Hopefully they can meet expectations, because the Red Sox certainly didn't, and the Bruins, the Patriots, we'll see what happens in the coming weeks with their quarterback situation, might miss the playoffs as well. So hopefully the Bruins can get back there and do exactly what I'm talking about. I'm excited for them. They'll start their season this coming Wednesday against the Washington Capitals, another team that I didn't even mention in the conference, who still has some top talent. So I think it's wide open in the East, and it's going to be a whole lot of fun, and I'm super excited for it. We'll be covering a lot here in concurrence with the other sports at Home Field Advantage. We'll also be back pretty soon with our big NHL preview. We look forward to having you listen to that as well. Please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell your friends, tell us all about it, share our channel, subscribe, listen live, watch live, do all that stuff. And we'd love to have you there as well. So without further ado, I'll close the episode now, but please drop your comments below if you're interested in having some input. But until next time, you've been listening to this special edition of Home Field Advantage with Will Highland. Thank you.